Hola. My name is Hector Rivera. I'm from the movie Coco. In that movie Coco, it represents the Day of the Dead. The Day of the Dead is from Mexico. After Halloween is over, we celebrate the Day of the Dead. It's about honoring people who have died. We celebrate our ancestors and people who have died. I was born in November 30th, 1900. December 1921, I was died at age 21. I was the husband of Imelda, the father of Coco Rivera. Miguel is my long-lost great-great-grandson. Now, I'm going to tell you about the history behind the Day of the Dead. The Day of the Dead, Spanish, El Día de Muertos or El Día de los Muertos, is a holiday traditionally celebrated on November 1st and 2, though other days, such as October 31st or November 6th, may be included depending on the locality. It is widely observed in Mexico, where it largely developed, and is also observed in other places, especially by people of Mexican heritage. Although related to the simultaneous Christian remembrances for Hallowtide, it has a much less solemn tone and is portrayed as a holiday of joyful celebration rather than mourning. Some argue that there are indigenous Mexican or ancient Aztec influences that account for the custom, and it has become a way to remember those forebears of Mexican culture. The multi-day holiday involves family and friends gathering to pay respects and to remember friends and family members who have died. These celebrations can take a humorous tone, as celebrants remember funny events and anecdotes about the departed. Observed by Mexico, and regions with large Mexican populations type cultural Christian with syncretic elements significance prayer and remembrance of friends and family members who have died. Celebration creation of home altars, to remember the dead. Traditional dishes for the Day of the Dead begins November 1st and ends at November 2nd. Frequency, annual, related to All Saints' Day, All Hallows' Eve, All Souls' Day. Traditions connected with the holiday include honoring the deceased using calaveras and marigold flowers known as sempezachitl, building home altars called ofrendas with the favorite foods and beverages of the departed, and visiting graves with these items as gifts for the deceased. 9. The celebration is not solely focused on the dead, as it is also common to give gifts to friends such as candy sugar skulls, to share traditional pan de muerto with family and friends, and to write light-hearted and often irreverent verses in the form of mock epitaphs dedicated to living friends and acquaintances, a literary form known as calaveras literarias. Mexican academics are divided on whether the festivity has genuine indigenous pre-Hispanic roots, or whether it is a 20th century rebranded version of a Spanish tradition developed during the presidency of Lázaro Cárdenas to encourage Mexican nationalism through an Aztec identity. The festivity has become a national symbol in recent decades, and it is taught in the nation's school system asserting a native origin. Views differ on whether the festivity has indigenous pre-Hispanic roots, whether it is a more modern adaptation of an existing European tradition, or a combination of both as a manifestation of syncretism. Similar traditions can be traced back to medieval Europe, where celebrations like All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day are observed on the same days in places like Spain and Southern Europe. Critics of the Native American origin claim that even though pre-Columbian Mexico had traditions that honored the dead, current depictions of the festivity have more in common with European traditions of dance macabre and their allegories of life and death personified in the human skeleton to remind of the ephemeral nature of life. Over the past decades, however, Mexican academia has increasingly questioned the validity of this assumption, even going as far as calling it a politically motivated fabrication. Historian Elsa Malvado, researcher for the Mexicanina and founder of the Institut's Taller de Estudios sobre la Muerte, was the first to do so in the context of her wider research into Mexican attitudes to death and disease across the centuries. Malvado completely discards her native or even syncretic origin, arguing that the tradition can be fully traced to medieval Europe. She highlights the existence of similar traditions on the same day, not just in Spain, but in the rest of Catholic Southern Europe and Latin America, such as altars for the dead, sweets in the shape of skulls and bread in the shape of bones. Agustin Sanchez Gonzalez has a similar view in his article published in the INA's bi-monthly journal Arqueología Mexicana. Gonzalez states that, even though the indigenous narrative became hegemonic, the spirit of the festivity has far more in common with European traditions of dance macabre and their allegories of life and death personified in the human skeleton to remind us the ephemeral nature of life. He also highlights that in the 19th century press there was little mention of the Day of the Dead in the sense that we know it today. All there was were long processions to cemeteries, sometimes ending with drunkenness. Imelda also points to the recent origin of the tradition of velar, or staying up all night with the dead. It resulted from the reform laws under the presidency of Benito Juarez, which forced family pantheons out of churches and into civil cemeteries, requiring rich families having servants guarding family possessions displayed at altars. The historian Ricardo Pérez Montfort has further demonstrated how the ideology known as indigenismo became more and more closely linked to post-revolutionary official projects, whereas Hispanismo was identified with conservative political stances. This exclusive nationalism began to displace all other cultural perspectives, to the point that in the 1930s the Aztec god Quetzalcoatl was officially promoted by the government as a substitute for the Spanish Three Kings tradition, with a person dressed up as the deity offering gifts to poor children. In this context, the Day of the Dead began to be officially isolated from the Catholic Church by the leftist government of Lázaro Cárdenas, motivated both by indigenismo and left-leaning anti-clericalism. Imelda herself goes as far as calling the festivity a Cardenas invention, whereby the Catholic elements are removed and emphasis is laid on indigenous iconography, the focus on death in what Imelda considers to be the cultural invention according to which Mexicans venerate death. Gonzalez explains that Mexican nationalism developed diverse cultural expressions with a seal of tradition, but which are essentially social constructs, which eventually developed ancestral tones. One of these would be the Catholic Dia de Muertos, which, during the 20th century, appropriated the elements of an ancient pagan rite. One key element of the rite-developed festivity which appears during this time is La Calavera Catrina by Mexican lithographer José Guadalupe Posada. According to Gonzalez, while Posada is portrayed in current times as the restorer of Mexico's pre-Hispanic tradition, he was never interested in Native American culture or history. Posada was predominantly interested in drawing scary images which are far closer to those of the European Renaissance or the horrors painted by Francisco de Goya in the Spanish War of Independence against Napoleon than to the Mexico subsequently. The recent transatlantic connection can also be observed in the pervasive use of couplet and allegories of death in the play Don Juan Tenorio by 19th-century Spanish writer José Zorrilla, which is represented on this date both in Spain and in Mexico since the early 19th century due to its ghostly apparitions and cemetery scenes. Opposing views assert that despite the obvious European influence, there exists proof of pre-Columbian festivities that were very similar in spirit, with the Aztec people having at least 6 celebrations during the year that were very similar to Day of the Dead, the closest one being Cuacali, a celebration that honored Mixcoatl, the god of war, and was celebrated between October 20th and November 8th. This celebration included elements such as the placement of altars with food, tamales, near the burying grounds of warriors to help them in their journey to the afterlife. 13. Influential Mexican poet and Nobel Prize laureate Octavio Paz strongly supported the syncretic view of the Dia de Muertos tradition being a continuity of ancient Aztec festivals celebrating death, as is most evident in the chapter All Saints, Day of the Dead of his 1950 book-length essay The Labyrinth of Solitude. Ruben C. Cordova emphasizes the zeal with which the Spanish attempted to extinguish indigenous religious beliefs and practices, such that it is often difficult to reconstruct their main features. Over time, indigenous converts became extremely devout Catholics. As Mexico modernized, the traditional practices and the Spanish had brought to the Americas survived most robustly in rural and less affluent communities, which had high concentrations of indigenous and mestizo populations. Thus archaic Spanish religious practices in marginal areas came to be mistakenly regarded as the pure core of primarily indigenous Day of the Dead festivities. The Aztecs devoted 2 20-day months in their ritual calendar to the dead, the 9th and 10th months, which were for children and adults, respectively. Cordova argues that some recollection of these festivals was compressed down to 2 days and cryptically celebrated within the Catholic liturgical calendar, which is why, in Mexico, unlike other Latin American countries with Day of the Dead traditions, All Saints' Day is dedicated to children, and All Souls' Day is dedicated to adults. He also notes that the same object, such as a stone skull carved by the Aztecs, would have different meanings in different religious contexts. For the Aztecs, bones, and skulls in particular, were reservoirs of enormous sacred power. A stone skull could evoke sacrifice, and the skull racks where the skulls of sacrificed captives were displayed. The Spanish could take an Aztec skull and repurpose it by placing it on a holy water font, or under a cross in a cemetery, whereby it would be transformed into a memento mori. Regardless of its origin, the festivity has become a national symbol in Mexico and as such is taught in the nation's school system, typically asserting a native origin. It is also a school holiday nationwide. Altars and installations in Mexico City museums and public spaces. A number of Mexico City's museums and public spaces have played an important part in developing and promoting urban Day of the Dead traditions through altars and installations. These notable organizations include, Anahuacli, the Frida Kahlo Museum, the Museum of Popular Cultures, the Dolores Olmedo Museum, the Museum of the First Printing Press, and the Cloister of Sor Juana. From turn of the millennium until the imposition of the James Bond-inspired parade, remarkable large-scale installations were created on the Zócalo, Mexico City's central square. Altars, ofrendas. During Dia de Muertos, the tradition is to build private altars, ofrendas, containing the favorite foods and beverages, as well as photos and memorabilia of the departed. The intent is to encourage visits by the souls, so the souls will hear the prayers and the words of the living directed to them. These altars are often placed at home or in public spaces such as schools and libraries, but it is also common for people to go to cemeteries to place these altars next to the tombs of the departed. Plans for the day are made throughout the year, including gathering the goods to be offered to the dead. During the 3-day period, families usually clean and decorate graves. 23. Most visit the cemeteries where their loved ones are buried and decorate their graves with ofrendas, altars, which often includes orange Mexican marigolds, Tejits erecta, called Sempahuachil, originally named Sempahualzacatl, Nahuatl for 20 flowers. In modern Mexico, the marigold is sometimes called Flor de Muerto, flower of dead. These flowers are thought to attract souls of the dead to the offerings. It is also believed that bright petals with a strong scent can guide the souls from cemeteries to their family homes. Toys are brought for dead children, Los Angelitos, or the Little Angels, and bottles of tequila, mezcal or pulque or jars of alcohol for adults. Families will also offer trinkets or the deceased's favorite candies on the grave. Some families have ofrendas in homes, usually with food such as candied pumpkin, pan de muerto, bread of dead, and sugar skulls, and beverages such as adal. The ofrendas are left out in the homes as a welcoming gesture for the deceased. Some people believe the spirits of the dead eat the spiritual essence of the ofrenda's food, so though the celebrators eat the food after the festivities, they believe it lacks nutritional value. Pillows and blankets are left out so the deceased can rest after their long journey. In some parts of Mexico, such as the towns of Mixquic, Pátzcuaro and Janitzio, people spend all night beside the graves of their relatives. In many places, people have picnics at the grave site, as well. Some families build altars or small shrines in their homes. These sometimes feature a Christian cross, statues or pictures of the Blessed Virgin Mary, pictures of deceased relatives and other people, scores of candles, and an ofrenda. Traditionally, families spend some time around the altar, praying and telling anecdotes about the deceased. In some locations, celebrants wear shells on their clothing, so when they dance, the noise will wake up the dead. Some will also dress up as the deceased. Food? During Day of the Dead festivities, food is both eaten by living people and given to the spirits of their departed ancestors as ofrendas, offerings. Tamales are one of the most common dishes prepared for this day for both purposes. Pan de Muerto and calaveras are associated specifically with Day of the Dead. Pan de Muerto is a type of sweet roll shaped like a bun, topped with sugar, and often decorated with bone-shaped pieces of the same pastry. Calaveras, or sugar skulls, display colorful designs to represent the vitality and individual personality of the departed. In addition to food, drinks are also important to the tradition of Day of the Dead. Historically, the main alcoholic drink was pulque. Today families will commonly drink the favorite beverage of their deceased ancestors. Other drinks associated with the holiday are adal and champurrado, warm, thick, non-alcoholic masa drinks. Agua de Jamaica, water of hibiscus, is a popular herbal tea made of the flowers and leaves of the Jamaican hibiscus plant, Hibiscus sabdorifa, known as Flor de Jamaica in Mexico. It is served cold and quite sweet with a lot of ice. The root beer beverage is also known as hibiscus tea in English-speaking countries. The traditions and activities that take place in celebration of the Day of the Dead are not universal, often varying from town to town. For example, in the town of Pátzcuaro on the Lago de Pátzcuaro in Michoacán, the tradition is very different if the deceased is a child rather than an adult. On November 1st of the year after a child's death, the godparents set a table in the parents' home with sweets, fruits, pan de muerto, a cross, a rosary used to ask the Virgin Mary to pray for them, and candles. This is meant to celebrate the child's life, in respect and appreciation for the parents. There is also dancing with colorful costumes, often with skull-shaped masks and devil masks in the plaza or garden of the town. At midnight on November 2nd, the people light candles and right-winged boats called mariposas, butterflies, to Janitzio, an island in the middle of the lake where there is a cemetery, to honor and celebrate the lives of the dead there. In contrast, the town of Ocotepec, north of Cuernavaca in the state of Morelos, opens its doors to visitors in exchange for veladoras, small wax candles, to show respect for the recently deceased. In return, the visitors receive tamales and atol. This is done only by the owners of the house where someone in the household has died in the previous year. Many people of the surrounding areas arrive early to eat for free and enjoy the elaborate altars set up to receive the visitors. Another peculiar tradition involving children is La Danza de los Viejitos, the dance of the old men, where boys and young men dressed like grandfathers crouch and jump in an energetic dance. In the 2015 James Bond film Spectre, the opening sequence features a Day of the Dead parade in Mexico City. At the time, no such parade took place in Mexico City. 1 year later, due to the interest in the film and the government desire to promote the Mexican culture, the federal and local authorities decided to organize an actual Dia de Muertos parade through Paseo de la Reforma and Centro Histórico on October 29, 2016, which was attended by 250,000 people. This could be seen as an example of the pizza effect. The idea of a massive celebration was also popularized in the Disney Pixar movie Coco. This is Hector Rivera signing off. Bye.